Welcome to the Last Breath Diaries. Today, hear a firefighter's incredible near-death story and the divine lesson: prayer isn't enough. The firehouse always smelled like a mix of burnt coffee and old leather, a scent that clung to the walls and hung in the air like a familiar embrace. The morning sun filtered through the narrow windows, casting long golden rays across the scuffed linoleum floor. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth as it seeped into my tired bones. It was an ordinary morning, one of those rare lulls when the world seemed to catch its breath. And so did we. The camaraderie here was unlike anything else I'd ever known. It was family, but different. A bond forged in smoke and flame, in the unspoken promise that we'd always have each other's backs. Laughter bounced off the brick walls as someone cracked a joke about last night's card game. I chuckled, the sound rolling out of me as naturally as breathing. But beneath the humor, there was always a flicker of tension, the kind that never fully left you in this line of work. We all knew how quickly the day could change. I leaned back in my chair, stretching out the tightness in my shoulders, and let my eyes wander over the room. The faded calendar on the wall still read December, though it was mid-January. A lone Christmas decoration and a paper Santa fluttered slightly in the draft from the door. It was a small detail, but one that made me smile. Life moved slower here, in between the chaos. A sharp ding broke the moment, the familiar chime of the alarm that could flip our world upside down in an instant. My heart gave its usual jolt, but my body moved automatically, every step ingrained from years of practice. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the intercom. "Warehouse fire, multiple reports of entrapment." The adrenaline hit like a switch, electrifying and sharp. I tossed my mug onto the counter, coffee sloshing onto the surface, and grabbed my gear. Each piece of equipment was like an extension of myself. Boots, pants, jacket, helmet, all donned in a fluid, practiced motion. The weight settled over me, familiar and grounding, even as my thoughts raced. By the time we piled into the truck, the mood had shifted. The laughter was gone, replaced by focused determination. The siren screamed as we tore through the streets, weaving between cars that pulled aside like obedient soldiers. I kept my eyes trained on the horizon, but my mind drifted to the family trapped inside. Were they huddled together, coughing in the smoke? Were they praying, hoping for rescue? Chills materialized and shivered through my skin. Were they praying, hoping for rescue? The thought tightened my chest. I glanced around at my crew. Each face was a mask of resolve, but I knew their thoughts mirrored mine. It wasn't fear, it was responsibility. The kind that made your palms sweat even as your grip on the hose stayed firm. When we arrived, the scene hit me like a gut punch. The warehouse was a towering inferno, flames clawing at the sky in shades of violent orange and red. Smoke billowed out in thick, choking plumes, a dark storm against the morning light. The heat radiated across the asphalt, and I could feel it even through my gear, prickling my skin like the sting of a sunburn. We moved quickly, a well-rehearsed dance of preparation. The sound of water blasting from the hose was deafening, a roar that merged with the chaos of shouting voices and the groaning of the collapsing structure. I gripped the nozzle tightly, my gloves slick with sweat despite the freezing January air. The smell was overwhelming. A nauseating mix of burning wood, melting plastic, and something darker, something acrid that clawed at the back of my throat. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the task at hand. My partner, Jones, tapped my shoulder, signaling that we were moving in. Inside, the world shrank to a tunnel of smoke and flame. Visibility was near zero, the air thick with heat and ash. My breath rasped in the mask, a constant reminder of my fragility in this hostile environment. Each step felt precarious, the floor beneath us groaning under the weight of the fire's assault. We moved methodically, scanning each corner for signs of life. The walls were alive with the fire's hunger, tongues of flame licking at the edges of my vision. My mind raced through our training: stay low, keep moving, communicate clearly. But training could only prepare you so much. A crash echoed from somewhere deep within the warehouse, followed by a child's cry, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the noise like a knife. My heart clenched, and I met Jones's eyes through the haze. No words were needed. We pressed forward, deeper into the inferno, the cry guiding us like a beacon. My legs burned with exertion as we climbed over debris, each step heavier than the last. The air grew hotter, the smoke thicker, but I pushed it aside. There was no room for hesitation. Each second mattered. Finally, we found them, a mother clutching her two children, their faces streaked with soot and terror. Relief flooded me, momentarily drowning out the fire's roar. Jones took the smaller child, and I lifted the other into my arms, their tiny frame trembling against me. "We've got you," I said, my voice muffled but steady. As we made our way back, the heat intensified, and the warehouse seemed to close in around us. My mind flickered to my own family. My wife's smile, the way my daughter's laughter could fill a room. For the first time that day, a sliver of fear crept in. We were almost out when I heard it, a low, ominous creak. The beam above us buckled, and time seemed to slow. I didn't think, I just reacted, shoving Jones and the children forward. And then, everything went dark. When the beam collapsed, it wasn't the sound that struck me first, but the sensation of violent jolt, as though the ground itself had turned against me. The world tipped sideways and a crushing weight pinned me to the floor. I gasped, but the air was fire. My lungs burned with every shallow breath, each inhale pulling smoke and ash deeper into my body. The pain was immediate and all-encompassing, a fierce, unrelenting heat searing through my legs where the debris trapped me. I tried to move, but the beam held firm, an unyielding force pressing me into the scorched concrete. The rough surface beneath me scraped at my skin, and every shift sent fresh jolts of agony rippling through my body. Around me, the warehouse roared. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, alive and monstrous. The fire crackled and snarled, its greedy tongues devouring everything in their path. The walls groaned under the strain, and I could feel the heat intensifying, closing in like a predator circling its prey. The smoke was relentless, thick and suffocating. It filled every crevice of the air, turning it into a smothering blanket that wrapped itself around me. My mask was still in place, but the supply of oxygen was dwindling, each breath shallower than the last. I fought against the rising tide of panic, my training whispering in the back of my mind, "Stay calm. Conserve air. Someone will come." But the minutes stretched endlessly, each one heavier than the last. My mind raced, desperate for escape. I strained against the beam, muscles screaming in protest, but it was futile. I was trapped, utterly at the mercy of the fire. The radio crackled faintly in my ear, a lifeline to the world beyond this hell. Voices called my name, their urgency cutting through the chaos. "Where's Carter? Anyone have eyes on Carter?" The sound was both a comfort and a torment. They knew I was missing, but would they find me in time? Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes and mixing with the soot that clung to my skin. My gloves were slick, making it hard to grip anything. I could feel the fire's heat creeping closer, licking at the edges of my gear, threatening to breach the fragile barrier that stood between me and oblivion. Time warped, each second stretching into an eternity. My thoughts became disjointed. fragmented by the pain and the smoke. Flashes of memory surfaced, unbidden. My wife's laugh, the way her hair caught the sunlight on our wedding day, my daughter's small hand in mine as we walked to her first day of school. These images were sharp and vivid, a cruel reminder of everything I might never see again. I wasn't ready. The thought hit me with the force of a blow. There was so much I hadn't said, so much I hadn't done. Regret coiled around my chest, tightening like a vice. I thought about the arguments, the moments I'd taken for granted. Would this be my legacy? A firefighter who didn't make it home? The beam above me groaned again, a low, ominous sound that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Debris rained down, small but sharp, cutting through the thick fabric of my gear and biting into my skin. My helmet shielded my head, but I could feel the weight of the structure bearing down, pressing me further into the unforgiving ground. A sudden sound pierced the chaos, a child's cry, faint but unmistakable. My heart lurched. Were they still here? Had we missed someone? The thought ignited something deep within me, a spark of defiance against the hopelessness that threatened to consume me. But the fire didn't care about my defiance. It pressed on, relentless and indifferent. My breaths came faster, more desperate, the oxygen in my tank nearly depleted. The heat was unbearable now, a constant, searing presence that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. Darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision, a heavy, suffocating blackness that threatened to swallow me whole. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, each beat a reminder of the life that was slipping away. And then, as the darkness closed in, I felt something shift. It was subtle at first, a faint sensation, like the whisper of a breeze in a sealed room. The fire's roar seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness. The pain dulled, not gone but distant, as though it belonged to someone else. I blinked, or at least I thought I did, but the world didn't come back into focus. Instead, I felt a strange lightness, a sensation so foreign that it took me a moment to understand. My body was still pinned beneath the beam, but I wasn't. I hovered above the scene, suspended in a surreal stillness, watching the chaos unfold below. The fire raged on, consuming everything in its path, but I felt no fear. The pain, the suffocation, the panic, they were all gone, replaced by an inexplicable calm. I looked down at my body, motionless and battered, and for the first time, I realized how fragile it truly was. The prettiest group of them, the warehouse blurred around me, the flames and smoke fading into the periphery. Somewhere in the distance, a light began to grow, soft and inviting. It wasn't just bright, it was alive, pulsing with a warmth that seemed to call to me. I hesitated, torn between the pull of the light and the scene below. My crew was there, searching, their voices muffled and distorted. I wanted to call out, to tell them I was here, but no sound came. Instead, I felt myself drawn toward the light, weightless and free. The fire, the pain, the fear, all of it melted away, leaving only the steady pull of something greater, something that felt like home. At first, it felt like falling fast and disorienting, as if I were tumbling through layers of air too thin to hold me. But then, just as quickly, the motion stopped, and I was floating. The world below me still burned, the warehouse a churning sea of fire and smoke, but I was no longer part of it. I hovered above the scene, weightless, as if gravity itself had forgotten me. I looked down and saw myself pinned beneath the beam. My body was twisted, lifeless, half covered in debris. The sight was surreal, like staring at a reflection in a funhouse mirror, familiar but distorted, foreign. That was me. Yet it wasn't. There was a strange detachment, a quiet understanding that the thing lying below was merely a shell, something I'd inhabited but no longer needed. The fire raged on, consuming everything in its path, but the heat no longer reached me. The roar of the flames, once deafening, now seemed distant, muffled, like hearing the world through a thick pane of glass. The only sound that remained was my breath, or rather, the absence of it. My chest didn't rise or fall. My heart no longer beat. And yet, I was alive, in a way I had never been before. Colors around me began to shift. The warehouse, with its sharp edges and fiery chaos, softened, blurring at the edges as though the world itself was dissolving. In its place, light began to form, not harsh or blinding, but gentle, radiant. It wasn't just light, it was warmth, a presence that wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. The pull of the light was undeniable, a gravitational force that reached deep into the core of my being. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, as if every cell in my body, every fragment of my soul, yearned to move toward it. It promised peace, not just the absence of pain, but a wholeness I hadn't realized I was missing. As I drifted toward the light, the memories began. They came not as flashes, but as living, breathing moments, replayed in exquisite detail. I saw my wife on our wedding day, her laughter ringing out like a melody as we danced beneath a canopy of stars. I felt the tiny fingers of my newborn daughter curl around mine, her wide eyes staring up at me with trust and love. But alongside the joy came regret. I saw the arguments, the times I'd let work consume me, leaving little energy for the people who mattered most. I saw my daughter's face fall when I missed another recital, my wife's forced smile as she assured me it was fine. The weight of those moments pressed on me, heavier than the beam that had trapped me. The light seemed to sense my hesitation, my shame. It pulsed gently, not with judgment, but with understanding. It was as if it knew everything about me, the good, the bad, the moments I was proud of, and the ones I wished I could erase. And still, it welcomed me. And as I moved closer, the light took on a texture, a shape. It wasn't a singular point, but a vast expanse, alive and dynamic. Within it, I could see fragments of other places, other lives. Colors I couldn't name danced within its depths, blending and shifting like the northern lights on a cosmic scale. And then I heard it, a sound so profound it felt like it came from within me. It wasn't a voice exactly, but a harmony, a resonance that vibrated through every part of me. It was music, but more than music, a symphony of emotions and truths. It spoke without words, yet I understood it completely. The presence within the light grew stronger, more distinct. It was no longer an abstract force, but something personal, intimate. I felt seen, not just as the man I had been, but as the soul I was. The weight of my regrets, my failures, began to lift. In their place, there was acceptance, a sense that, despite everything, I was enough. In very quiet, the sense that, despite everything, I was enough. As I neared the light, figures began to emerge. At first they were shadows, outlines shimmering at the edges of my vision. Then they became clearer, faces I knew, faces I loved. My grandmother, who had passed when I was a teenager, smiled at me, her eyes sparkling with the same warmth I remembered from childhood. A friend from the academy who died in the line of duty stood beside her, his posture as steady and strong as it had been in life. They didn't speak, yet their presence spoke volumes. I felt their love, their pride, their assurance that I wasn't alone. They were here to guide me, to welcome me into a realm that felt more real than anything I had ever known. But then I hesitated. A tether, invisible yet unbreakable, pulled at me from the world below. It wasn't time. I could feel it in the deepest part of me. There was something left undone, a reason to return. The light seemed to acknowledge this, pulsing one final time with a warmth that filled me to the brim. As much as I longed to stay, I knew I had to go back. The figures smiled, their love surrounding me like a cocoon as the light began to fade. The world around me shifted once more, the colors and warmth giving way to the harsh, smoke-filled reality of the warehouse. But something within me had changed. I carried the light with me now, a small, eternal flame that would guide me through whatever came next. As the light receded and the familiar chaos of the warehouse faded entirely, I found myself in a place I could never have imagined. It wasn't the world I had left, nor was it the pure, radiant expanse of light that had drawn me in before. It was somewhere in between, a realm suspended outside of time, where the air seemed to hum with energy and the ground beneath me was both solid and ethereal, as though it were woven from strands of light. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the oppressive kind that comes with isolation, but a serene stillness, like the moment before dawn when the world holds its breath. The atmosphere was alive with a kind of resonance, a symphony of unspoken truths that flowed around me and through me. I was part of it, and yet separate, a single note in a vast, endless melody. Then I saw him. At first, it was just a presence, a force that seemed to radiate from everywhere at once. But as I focused, the figure took form. He stood at the center of the expanse, bathed in a light so pure it seemed to flow through him like water through glass. His eyes were unlike anything I'd ever seen, infinitely deep, filled with compassion and power. They didn't just look at me, they looked into me, through every barrier I'd ever built, seeing every hidden corner of my soul. "Come closer," the voice said, not aloud, but within me. It was a voice that resonated with 1,000 tones, all at once gentle and commanding. It wasn't a question or a demand, but an invitation, and I found myself moving toward him without hesitation. As I approached, I became acutely aware of myself, not just my physical form, but everything I had ever been. My joys, my triumphs, my failures, my regrets, all of it was laid bare, a tapestry of my life spread out for both of us to see. I expected judgment, a reckoning for all the ways I'd fallen short. But what I felt instead was love, so vast and unconditional it brought me to my knees. "It's not enough to just pray," he said, his voice gentle but firm. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My thoughts felt small and fragmented in the presence of such overwhelming truth. He didn't need me to speak. He already knew. "You've been given much," he continued, "but you've held back. You've prayed, yes, but prayer is not the end, it's the beginning. Action, love, service, these are the fruits of faith. They are what transform prayers into miracles." The words struck me like lightning, illuminating parts of myself I had long ignored. I thought of my prayers, often hurried and perfunctory, whispered in moments of fear or desperation. I thought of the promises I had made to be better, to do better, and the countless times I had let those promises slip away in the busyness of life. "I tried," I said at last, my voice barely a whisper. "I wanted to be enough." He smiled, and the warmth of it washed over me like sunlight breaking through a storm. "You are enough," he said. not because of what you do, but because of who you are. But you were made for more, for love, for courage, for sacrifice. You were made to act. The words stirred something deep within me, a flicker of determination that grew into a flame. I thought of my family, my daughter's laughter, my wife's quiet strength. I thought of my crew, the brothers and sisters who had risked everything for one another. I thought of the people I had saved and the ones I hadn't. As if sensing my thoughts, he extended a hand. Do you understand now? I reached out, and as our hands met, a flood of images and sensations filled my mind. I saw moments from my life, not as I had experienced them, but as they truly were, each act of kindness rippling outward, touching lives I'd never known. I saw the power of love and service, the way it could transform even the smallest gesture into something eternal. Sharon. Tears streamed down my face, and I didn't try to stop them. I understand, I said, my voice steady this time. I'll do better. I'll live better. He nodded, his expression both kind and resolute. Then go. The world still needs you. The light around him began to shift, brightening until it became impossible to look directly at him. I felt a pull, a gentle but insistent force drawing me away. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had to. Will I see you again? I asked, my voice trembling. His answer came not in words, but in a feeling, a certainty that he would always be with me, even if I couldn't see him. The world around me began to dissolve, the vibrant light and serene stillness giving way to darkness. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I carried his words with me, a beacon to guide me back to the life I was meant to live. And then, with a final surge of light, I was gone. The first sensation was pain, sharp, searing, and immediate. It wasn't the distant ache I'd felt as I hovered above my body. It was visceral, clawing its way through me like fire in my veins. My lungs burned, desperate for air, and I gasped involuntarily, drawing in acrid smoke that sent me into a violent coughing fit. At a maximum effort, this forceful effort seemed impossible. The weight was still there, pressing down on my legs, pinning me to the scorched ground. But this time, it was real, heavy, and suffocating. My mind reeled as the memories of the other realm, the light, his words clashed with the chaotic reality around me. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I belonged. Above the roar of the flames and the crackle of collapsing debris, I heard a voice, faint at first, then louder, clearer. Carter, hang on, we've got you. It was Danny, my lieutenant. His words carried urgency, but they were a lifeline, pulling me out of the fog of confusion and back into the moment. I tried to respond, but my throat felt raw, each attempt to speak coming out as little more than a rasp. Still, I managed a weak nod, hoping it was enough. The beam shifted slightly, and fresh pain shot through me, but I clenched my teeth and focused on the voices above me. As my crew worked to free me, time seemed to warp. Every second stretched endlessly, the sounds of their efforts blending with the noise of the firestorm around us. I felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Grateful for their determination, guilty that my life now endangered theirs. The air grew thinner, hotter, and I struggled to stay conscious. My mind drifted, and I found myself replaying the encounter in the light. His words echoed in my head. Prayer is not the end. It's the beginning. You were made to act. The word felt like a command, a mission stamped onto my very being. I wasn't back here by chance. There was a purpose to this second chance. The thought gave me strength, a flicker of resolve that refused to be extinguished, even as the flames licked closer. Finally, the weight lifted. Hands reached under my arms, pulling me free of the rubble. The sudden release was both a relief and a shock. the absence of pressure making the pain in my legs even more pronounced. I bit down a scream as they hoisted me onto a stretcher, my vision blurring from the effort to stay conscious. The journey out of the warehouse was a blur of motion and noise. The world tilted and swayed as they carried me through the wreckage, their voices a constant reassurance. "You're going to be okay, Carter. Just stay with us." When we emerged into the cool night air, the contrast was staggering. The sky above was a deep, endless black, punctuated by stars that seemed impossibly bright. The fresh air hit my lungs like a wave, sharp and cleansing. But even that wasn't enough to dispel the scent of smoke clinging to me. Medics swarmed around me, their hands efficient and steady. I felt the sting of an IV, the pinch of scissors cutting away my charred gear. Voices spoke in clipped professional tones, but I couldn't focus on the words. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the images of the light, the presence, the message. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught a glimpse of the warehouse. It was a skeleton of what it had been, a hulking frame silhouetted against the glow of dying flames. My crew stood nearby, their faces streaked with soot and sweat, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and relief. I wanted to thank them, to tell them how much their courage meant, but my body refused to cooperate. Instead, I let my eyes close, surrendering to the pull of unconsciousness. The next time I woke, the world was still. The hum of medical equipment filled the room, a low, rhythmic backdrop to the quiet of the hospital. The fluorescent lights above me were harsh, but they couldn't erase the warmth of the morning sun streaming through the window. I turned my head slightly, and there she was, my wife. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but the relief in her expression was unmistakable. Beside her sat our daughter, her small hand clutching mine with a fierceness that belied her age. Tears welled in my eyes, unbidden but unstoppable. "I'm here," I managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You scared me," she said softly, her voice breaking. I wanted to tell her everything, the light, the voice, the message, but the words felt too heavy, too sacred to share just yet. Instead, I squeezed her hand and said the only thing that mattered. "I'm sorry. For everything." She smiled through her tears, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "You're home. That's all that matters." But it wasn't all that mattered. I knew that now. Home was more than a place. It was a promise to love, to serve, to live fully. As I lay there, the weight of the encounter settled over me, not as a burden, but as a calling. I had been given a gift, a second chance, a new beginning, and I would not waste it. The fire had taken so much, but it had also given me clarity. Life wasn't about waiting for miracles, it was about becoming one. And as I held my family close, I vowed to live in a way that honored the light I had seen, the presence I had felt, and the purpose I now understood.